So here we are again at Thoresby Bridge, late September. Last time we were here I took the route over that stile and walked along the River Meaden, which is the official permitted walk. Today I'm going to take a route more familiar to people who have lived in Perlethorpe and Thoresby, which is this path which will lead us up to the church. Way across the fields there you can see the kennels, the post office from my last video, and we'll be working our way round to there. Blackberries nicely in season. Just see the church coming into view. And here we are, Perlethorpe Church. Now this gate is the entrance that the dukes and duchesses would have used. The carriage stopped here outside the gates. It was a white horse that drew the carriages, according to Jack Williamson's little biography. And this is the door they would use to enter the church. So I'm thinking once Thoresby Bridge became the route rather than the green bridge which you saw on the previous video, the path we've just walked up would have been the route the carriages took. But once motorised vehicles became the flavour of the day, probably this road here. Remember the spring lambs I shot in the first video? We will take a quick look in the graveyard. The gate was built to commemorate those who fell in the First World War. I think it was there installed in 1923 and added to for the Second World War. The Pierpont members' graves. And the carpenter's grave, as it's come to be known, which you can read about on my blog. An abundance of yew trees might suggest that some religious practices took here before Christian times. The yew tree was meant to keep evil spirits away, and so it's from such trees that Robin Hood the Green Man is said to have made his bow. And you can also read about this rather mysterious Pierpont grave, tombstone, also on my blog. That's quite a monument to someone who apparently doesn't even get placed in the family tree. Mysteries. And incredible though it sounds, there was indeed a church standing where I'm standing now, which couldn't be pulled down until the present church had finished being constructed, and that's on my blog as well. Okay, we leave the church behind. We had a look at the Perlethorpe Primary School, now an environmental centre, in the last video, so we'll take a walk down towards Perlethorpe. This would be the walk down from school at the end of school day. I seem to remember this was mostly chestnut trees then, in the 50s. On the right hand side of the road, the almshouses. And on the other side of the road, Home Farm. So at the end of this road we see Perlethorpe Village Hall. You can also read on my blog details about the building of the village hall. I think it was 1957, and in 1962 a social club was added at the side, run mostly by Mr. Mountjoy. Across the road from which we see Home Farm, and I remember in, again, the late 50s, this was where the pigsty stood. Operated mostly by Ukrainian workers, I believe, who couldn't really go home after the war. Now we come to a very distinctive curve in the road. This lodge is also mentioned on my blog. This is a new development, 2013. I think this is a private road now leading to the wood yard and the owner of the estate. New development or scar. And here, community view now, it's Perlethorpe village. Past the entrance to Home Farm. The blue box has been removed now from the side of the arch. That's where we used to collect our newspapers and comics from. So we'll pan around the village green. I think this is now where the chaplain or vicar would live. In my day the Tully's family lived there. Before that, two old ladies used to keep their buttons in button boxes on the mantelpiece. Radley's Lane was actually named after a man called Radley who lived in that house. The new building, so-called, which went up at the start of the 50s, I think actually 1950 itself. My kid brother was born upstairs in a bedroom there at number 2. Other names I would remember going around this village: the Georges, the Dewhursts, the Langstaffs, the Mountjoys lived at the base of this hill. Mr. Mountjoy, you'll remember earlier on, ran the social club. And I think the Carters lived in these cottages. He was the gamekeeper. There were 3 poplar trees at one time where those goalposts now stand, and I'm certain there was a flagpole on this second little green that I'm standing on now, and I believe the Wood family used to live in those bungalows. Let's move on down to the post office. Home Farm to the left, walking down now to Meaden Bridge. Now this looks very different. I've never seen the water levels this high. So I'm assuming this is yet another new development. So leaving the bridge, we walk up a hill to where the post office used to be. Now you might remember from the first video going over that bridge where the old mill once stood. And we looked across from that little bridge at these cottages here. Names I remember from these cottages, well, certainly Jack Williamson lived here. The Fletcher family lived here at one time. And down by the side of this cottage was the post office, where I was served by Mrs. Blanchard. And you can read more about that on my blog also. There's no post office there now. There's no shop in Perlethorpe. In my day, the post office was the only shop. The road at the side leads to the kennels. The kennels was originally where the foxhounds were housed, obviously with a name like the kennels. To the side you can see, I believe, the chaplain's house. It's where Mr. Barton used to live. Mr. Barton being the vicar, so that's where we would go for our confirmation classes. It was full of souvenirs from Newfoundland. And I believe this is where today Lady Roselle resides. Lady Mams's daughter. So I shall tear myself away from Perlethorpe village and begin the trek back to Thoresby Hall. You can see the church spire there in the horizon where we were. And do remember, this is all a permitted walk now. Visitors can come this way. Well, this is all new territory to me, but this marks the route back to the hall.